I'm Brabazon. I'm the Dean of Graduate Research at Flinders University, and welcome to vlog 273, Vulnerability. This is the penultimate vlog in our Rescue Yourself, Rescue Ourselves series, and it's recorded in a very, very special location, but more of that shortly. Today has been the most difficult vlog I've ever had to research, I've ever had to write, I've ever had to learn, and certainly I've ever had to record, because we did need to talk about vulnerability, didn't we? And look, I have problems with vulnerability, I do have problems talking about it, but that's not a surprise because international higher education has problems with vulnerability, and certainly doctoral programs have issues with vulnerability. The research has been quite powerful that I've conducted for this vlog, and it's also been personally and professionally confronting, but it seems appropriate at this penultimate vlog of this Rescue Yourself series that we do the difficult knowledge and we do the tough work. And look, we're going to be working through this research with a truly fine researcher who may indeed be a role model for some of you in how to configure and organise an academic career. And we're also going to be exploring some fine research around the phrase the vulnerable researcher that's starting to emerge in research at the moment. But as you can see, for the final two vlogs in this series, I'm not in Adelaide. I'm in Norfolk Island, a place of darkness, a place of despair, a place of melancholy, and perhaps maybe just a place of hope and second chances. It is a tiny place in the Pacific, a long way away from the rest of the world, and therefore it is appropriate, I think, that of all places we talk about vulnerability here. There is a sense that the world is a long, long way away, and you and I together are going to share this very intimate and very private conversation. Now, there are many scholars of vulnerability, but probably the best known and the most famous, and we're going to talk about that fame in a second, is Bren Brown, Professor Bren Brown. Now, while she doesn't maintain a Google Scholar profile, she certainly has a remarkable array of refereed scholarship, deploying qual and quant and mixed methods as we expect from social work researchers. She is the research professor at the University of Houston, where she holds the Huffington Foundation Chair. She's also, intriguingly, a visiting professor of management at the University of Texas Business School, which captures how her career has moved on into management and leadership theory later on in her career. Now, her career is a fascinating one and an intriguing model for a lot of our students, I think, in the applied social sciences and also the applied health sciences. Particularly, her career has revolved around specific decisions she has made about how to disseminate her research. So, Professor Brown completed her Bachelor of Social Work at the University of Texas in Austin in 1995. She completed her Masters of Social Work the following year and a Doctor of Philosophy in Social Work, graduating in 2002. She's published an array of very, very strong refereed articles. I've read her career in preparation for this vlog, and there are some remarkable qual-quant studies there. But what makes her unusual is she's also committed to the writing of scholarly monographs. But they're remarkable scholarly monographs, 5 of them, that have gone on to the New York Times best sellers list, of which Daring Greatly is probably the best known. Her profile was transformed by a single TED Talk, The Power of Vulnerability. And she's also filmed a lecture for Netflix in 2019, which I recommend to you. So interesting, a lecture, it's become a short film. Significantly, her research encompasses family relationships, working relationships, organisational culture, and yes, leadership and change. I wanted therefore to make sure I spent some time today introducing Professor Brown to you, because she is a role model for all of us, I think, in learning how to take risks and learning how to find new audiences. Therefore, my focus on vulnerability this morning, today, has many entrances and exits for you. If you are interested in perfectionism and how that makes you vulnerable in a doctoral program, we're going to talk about that and provide some resolutions for you. But if you are today lost in a bit of self-loathing, a bit of self-hatred, you really hate yourself, and you want to try and find a way out, then today might provide some options for you as well. But also, for everyone else who's doing pretty good, that's great. For everybody else, this is a very interesting vlog to think about, if you will, Antonio Gramsci's notion of the organic intellectual and how we disseminate research in an unusual and different way. So she's also, Professor Brown is also an outstanding teacher. She's won a series of teaching awards for social work, and she's supervised many graduate students, just like you, in grounded theory. And she is really one of the world's best known researchers on vulnerability and on shame. So yes, she does take the critique that her work is merely self-help. It is a dumbing down of scholarly research, but I don't think that's true. I think that is unfair. I think she has worked very strongly in the refereed literature, and she simply has found ways through outstanding writing to find new audiences. She offers, I think, for all of us, a very clear pathway through the challenges in doctoral education, and her critique of perfectionism particularly, I think, has a lot of value for us. And indeed, she goes further. She argues that all of us need to embrace our imperfections, and further, that when we embrace our imperfection, we enable the building of a community. But another key part of her work that I think is particularly useful for PhD students is how she focuses on the value of building a community. Because when we share our imperfections, we provide a compassionate, vulnerable, caring space to enable and construct research. Now, those of us who research share so much, and mostly what we share is an intense awareness of our own imperfections, our own ability to say, oh, that was wrong, or we did not the best we could do there. So Professor Brown states, quote, imperfections are not inadequacies. They are reminders that we are all in this together. So let's, together, understand vulnerability and why it matters in a PhD program, and why it matters to PhD students, and why indeed vulnerability should matter to all researchers throughout our careers. And I'll start with the key definition that Professor Brown provides for us. Quote, vulnerability is not winning or losing. It's having the courage to show up and to be seen when we have no control over the outcome. Now, if you think about, end of quote. Now, if you think about it, that's actually what a PhD program is. You enroll, you show up, and you don't necessarily know where this thing is going to go. Now, what we try and do in a PhD program is we ensure that our methodology aligns with our epistemology, and that epistemology is framed by a considered and careful and responsive ontology. But we know, I think, that instability is part of what research is, and that instability, the inability to predict what will happen, is what I think hampers the development of PhD students. And remember, this is a very serious issue. Only 1% of PhD students actually fail their degree. But in many national systems, 50% of PhD students are tripped from their program. So in other words, they leave without ever presenting a thesis for graduation and examination. So therefore, you can see the impact of vulnerability on PhD students. It takes courage to show up when you don't know what's going to happen. And that vulnerability, I think, is what creates the fear that we are just not good enough. And this is a huge problem in doctoral programs, but I would also argue this is a huge problem in universities. Universities are tough, ruthless, and nasty places. And you know what? They don't have to be. But what we're in a situation, what our institution is doing now, is it's hyper competitive. It's competitive for funding, it's competitive for jobs, it's competitive for every single grant and prize and award that you could be going for. And look, it may seem absolutely antithetical to talk about vulnerability in such a ruthless, tough, and nasty system. And I absolutely understand that. I get that. And look, there's no doubt that I've spent the bulk of my academic career not showing vulnerability, right? And if you do, you're in trouble, I've always thought. If you show pain or disquiet or doubt, people will kick you while you're down. You'll be slammed, you'll be ignored, you'll be laughed at, you'll be marginalised. And what this signifies really is that emotions in our university, except anger, and we'll come back to that in a second, emotions in our university are ridiculed and they are excluded. Now anger gets results in our universities. If someone's angry, they become the squeaky wheel and they're able to get results. And the Roosters agree with me. And the reason for this, I think, is emotions except for anger make academics uncomfortable. So remember that this discomfort actually has an epistemological foundation. The nature of research methods assumes that our research is repeatable, transparent, and rigorous. And all of that is incredibly important, all important. But these epistemologies and methodologies can spill over into an incredibly unproductive, and I would argue dangerous, ontology. Let me explain. Now, ontology, for those who came in late, refers to the things or the objects that exist in space and the relationship between them. Put another way, ontology is your understanding of reality. And the reality in our universities is that methodological rigour can spill so quickly and so easily into simplistic statements about objectivity and about the empirical. So, put another way, the ontology of academic research, with its focus on methodology, research questions, and yes, repeatability, organises our world into categories: the real and the imagined, believable and bizarre, objective and subjective, and of course, the challenging one, here we go, rigour and emotion. And that is why emotion, passion, excitement, subjectivity is so excluded from higher education, because it is ontologically antithetical from empirical research. Also, you'll notice that the focus on empirical and dispassionate research spills over so easily into the empirical and dispassionate researcher. So if you're doing empirical research, then you have to be an empirical researcher. Now, you know what? You know what? You can be a decent, ethical, compassionate, laughing, dancing person and still produce rigorous and considered research. Now, we know, don't we? Don't we know that passionate, exciting, enthusiastic responses to research, they don't block rigour, they don't block considered thinking. Indeed, excitement can propel people, can motivate people to achieve great things. But you can now see, I think, in methodological and ontological terms, why emotion, particularly, and also vulnerability, are so excluded from our higher education systems. This emotion renders us vulnerable in response to our research. So, great researchers supposedly exhibit gravitas. They are serious. And that gravitas, supposedly, is a marinade for significant research. Now, this is obviously absolute nonsense. But it's nonsense that shows power and longevity. It's perpetuated also, and let's be real here, it's perpetuated by a particular model of leadership in our universities. And the model of leadership in our universities is found in particular disciplines, particular types of research, particular methods, and also particular career trajectories. Now, I have been socialised into this system. I really get it. I entered a master's degree, research master's degree in 1992, and I had my first academic job in 1994. And I've not been one day out of work since then, and I'm aware of the incredible privilege of that and the ability to say that statement. Generations that follow won't be able to say that statement. Now, I know many of you weren't born then, 1992 and 1994. Yes. But look, I've worked through those years never having admitted weakness, knowing that you can't show emotion. And I've followed the Bogan respect. I've followed the Bogan t-shirt slogan through my life. Toughen up, princess. Toughen up, princess. And it was, and look, it is tough for women to be women in universities. In fact, we can't really be women in universities. We have to be sort of a full bloke in our universities. Can I say for blokes? Blokes have to be a particular sort of bloke in our universities. And as for our remarkable colleagues in the trans community, we have so much work left to do about consciousness and agency and choice and visibility. We've got work to do there. But it gets worse, doesn't it? Because it's tough for our colleagues in the humanities and the social sciences to actually live and breathe and survive in our universities, because the normative, recognised research is the experimental sciences and medical sciences. So you can see what's happening here. The overwhelming majority of people and disciplines in our university are never centred in university life. They're always compared to other people and other disciplines and found to be lacking, found to be wanting. Most of us are always being compared to what we are not. And that is the recipe for fear, for confusion, and yes, for profound vulnerability. So to survive in this educational workplace, to survive in this type of organisational culture where you're never centred, where you're never good enough, and look, it creates some seriously weird behaviour. And look, we see a lot of incredibly weird behaviour in universities because of this. So to survive in these sort of environments, you've got to be tough. You've got to be strong, toughen up, princess, right? And I've done that throughout my career. I have. I've been tough, and I've been strong, and I've moved forward with clarity and boldness. And look, I had goals. James, I had goals when I was as young as our youngest PhD students. When I was 21, 22, 23, I had some clear goals. What I wanted was just to be in stable work. I wanted stable work. I wanted to be a good teacher if I could. I wanted to produce good quality research that was able to move out into the community and make a difference. That's all I wanted in life. And that has been my life's work. And it's given me incredible pleasure. But then, you know what? As happens to all of us, stuff started to go wrong. Life sent some shocking reminders that strength and toughening up just don't cut it. So stuff, serious stuff, started to go wrong for me, as it does for all of us. So I took a job that I believed in passionately. I moved from a great job, I moved countries, it was everything. I changed my life for this job. And it was a catastrophic mistake. It was, when I arrived, an alcohol-fueled, staff would be in the bar when it opened at 11 a.m. It was an alcohol-fueled, angry place that simply had a leadership vacuum. And one of my colleagues killed himself in response to this appalling leadership culture. Now, that was my mistake. That was my mistake. It was my decision. And I couldn't pretty that up. I couldn't make excuses. It was a catastrophic mistake. And it had profound consequences for me and profound consequences for the people I care about in my life. Remember, all I wanted was a stable life and a stable career. But from that single mistake, I would never have stability ever again. And then, of course, my husband died. The man who was my entire world. We were two sides of the same bit of paper. And he got sick, and he died. And I remember thinking, as I was alone in that hospital room, as I watched him take his last breath, and as I watched that last breath end, I remember thinking, I wonder if I have enough life left in me to be able to take one step more. I wondered if I had enough strength in me to be able to stand up, and I did. I stood up, and I walked back to a car, carrying nothing but a dead man's wallet, keys, and watch. Now, for those of us who have lost a person who is our entire world, how do we actually keep living while most of us has died? We are dead, but we are still walking around. We are wounded, we are damaged, but still walking. And to this day, I would trade my life in a heartbeat, in a second, to bring him back. So I had a problem, I had a real problem, because I'd failed professionally and I'd failed personally. And that old slogan, "Tough it up, princess," just didn't cut it anymore. And in a tough time for higher education, I was vulnerable, personally and professionally. I felt like every day I was going to work and it was like my skin was burnt. It hurt to move. But you know what? I continued to show up. But I was a different person who was teaching and researching and in a leadership role. And there was no hiding, none. There was no hiding that I was vulnerable. And I found out something through that vulnerability. It was pretty surprising, actually. I found out that I was actually becoming a better teacher and a better supervisor and a better researcher and a better writer and a better leader through the vulnerability and the loss. And because I gave everything to that previous life, everything, and because I'd lost everything, it gave me an odd quietness and a freedom, because I knew that I could lose everything again and still survive. Now, being vulnerable has actually allowed other people, my colleagues, our students, to also be vulnerable, and all the other attributes that follow vulnerability, like kindness, like compassion, like decency, and like integrity. And of course, we've had incredibly successful students at Flinders, and I know why. Our students are remarkable because we've given our students the space to be vulnerable, to be themselves, to take risks and share their stories and know that in the sharing they will be respected and cared for. And if they fall, they will be helped to come on and continue. So I had to find new and better ways of being a dean and occupying a leadership role while, if you will, not being strong. And through this weakness, through this profound vulnerability, new opportunities emerged, including unbelievably a new and remarkable relationship. A new and remarkable man entered my life, and perhaps that was the most courage I've ever had to show in a lifetime, because I know the pain of losing someone that you love more than life. I know that pain. And the idea that I had to find the courage to go again and go differently, to give everything of myself again, even knowing how it might end, and what a gift that has been. So as you can see, vulnerability is incredibly important personally, but it's also incredibly important professionally. All the research is showing that nurses, particularly the caring professions who acknowledge their vulnerability, are better nurses. Similarly, and this is really important in the research literature at the moment, the leaders who show compassion and speak of their vulnerability are not only better leaders, but they are acknowledged as being more trustworthy and having greater integrity. Now, this takes a lot of courage to move through life like this. I'm not going to pull any punches today. This takes courage. Because being tough, being resolute, shields us. We're able to move through life and not feel too much of any kind. We are protected, and we never have to share our secrets. We're able to hide our weaknesses. But if you decide to be vulnerable, you're going to be moving through the world less protected. And you know what? You will hurt more. And you may not be ready for this. I'm aware that this is a very challenging series of ideas we're offering today. And you might be saying, look, I need to stay with my shield. But it's not a binary opposition. It's not a matter of strength versus vulnerability or being staunch versus feeling the fear and doing it anyway. That's not what we're talking about today. What I want you to think about, what I want us to talk about, is how we maybe all take those first steps in vulnerability, every day, just make slightly different decisions and see how that changes your life as a researcher, as a scholar, and how, you know what, it might actually change our universities. And let's be honest, let's be really honest here. Our universities need to change. If they're going to survive, they need to change. So for the rest of the blog, I'm going to move through, with friends, 10 quick strategies for you to consider. Today, if vulnerability can add something meaningful to your life. So let's do it. Tip number 1, you move from protection to learning mode. Now, it is easier to cause pain than to ease pain. And I would argue our institutions are very interested in causing people pain and discomfort rather than easing discomfort. And it's very easy to offload your pain and your anger and your profound sadness rather than actually confronting it, managing it and contextualizing it. We all do that. Our pain, our anger gets so much that we offload it rather than try and deal with it. So the goal in academic life, though, is to try and change the narrative a bit. We are scholars. We are in the learning business. We are interested in learning. Now, we don't need to protect what we know and shield it from others. The point of research is to learn and think and create and then disseminate it widely. Share what we know. So therefore, learn, don't protect. Read and think rather than protect and blame. Learning is everything. And you know what? What if success in a PhD program was not about completing a thesis and having it examined? What if we defined success in a PhD program as transforming your life, making you a better researcher? What if that's success in a PhD program? So attach your sense of self to learning, to your development. You are not your thesis. So respect feedback, but know that feedback is about your research. It's not about you. 2, the biggest one really. Beware comparisons. Failure is founded on blame and scarcity. So we need to find a way together to move away from scarcity thinking. Scarcity thinking makes us endlessly aware of our problems and our absences and our gaps and our issues. But as I always say, success is not a finite resource. Be calm in your vulnerability. Be calm in your fear. Be calm in your lack. Vulnerability turns toxic only when it leads to comparisons. That is, comparisons with others. Comparisons are, of course, self-defeating. They emerge from a culture of blame and finger-pointing. And I would argue the disengagement that emerges through comparisons, because while you're looking at what somebody else is doing, you're not actually doing the research work you need to do in scholarship. So comparisons allow you to sit in fear. Vulnerability allows you to feel the fear and do it anyway. 3, failure is feedback. Failure is feedback. Now, so many of the consequences and the weird emotional states that exist in our universities occur through a fear of failing. Failing is like an emotional checklist of our vulnerabilities and our liabilities. But actually, failure is not that. Failure is simply feedback. But of course, there is not a culture of equivalence in feedback. Not all feedback is equal. Now, if some hashtag random on Twitter or on YouTube says really terrible things about you, do not give that critique, a second thought. That's not feedback. My definition of feedback is if you're not prepared to put your name to it, then it's not meaningful feedback. So if some random on Twitter says something terrible, ignore it. If they haven't got the courage to put their name to a critique, it's not worth spending 1 second of your life thinking about it. Now, what I try and use, I've often argued that the most honest of culture is actually popular culture. It's extreme, it's excessive, but it is remarkable. And popular culture often speaks the truths that we can't actually articulate. And the most important truth of my life that I present for your consideration today is to occupy the present. Occupy the present with honesty and reflection. Now, the soundtrack of my life to capture this mantra, this idea, comes probably not surprisingly from a very minor hit. I think it was like in the top 20 just in the United Kingdom of an acid house track, sung by the legendary Cicero. You maybe never heard of Cicero. Love you, Cicero. Cicero was big, and this track was produced by the Pet Shop Boys. And the chorus of this track, Live for Today, has hooked deeply in my life, and I think about this song every day. And the chorus, forget the future, just let it go. If I ever hurt you, I never planned it that way. Until tomorrow, live for today. So the best of popular culture, I would argue, is so powerful because it hooks into our everyday moments and renders them extraordinary, right? So sit in the moment. Sit in this moment. And recognize every day that's in the ordinary. We live in times that if you try, if you breathe, if you move, you are going to be criticised. You will be attacked. And look, it is amazing how often we are attacked for caring too much, for being vulnerable, for laughing too loud, or showing great enthusiasm. But you do need to find meaning for yourself in education, in the PhD, in your work. And then what happens is when you find that meaning and you receive feedback, that's great, but you're able to translate that feedback into your context. 4, you accept uncertainty. Research is based on rigour and results and outcomes and, yes, impact. But most of life has nothing to do with those words. And that's why, of course, research is so odd in the context of everyday life. But research funding success is the weirdest of the weird. Because in research funding, in a grant, if you remotely use words like doubt, or perhaps, or it may not happen, or failure, or vulnerability, you will not get that grant, right? So if there is just a moment that we can reconfigure today as a family, what I'd love to do is reconfigure the relationship between truth and courage. I know truth is uncomfortable, right? I understand that. And truth is never a weakness. It's uncomfortable, but it's never a weakness. And as Narelle told us in our Christmas vlog, hi Narelle, as Narelle told us, we do need to speak about failure. We do need to speak our truth. And we need to recognise that failure does not mean that the research has failed. What it means is you've asked courageous research questions, and you know what? They're going to take a little bit longer to configure an answer to, and that's cool. So think about some of the most ambivalent and confronting popular culture that's ever been made. I often think about, I'm a big fan of the late great Leonard Cohen, and of course the very famous song Hallelujah that's been destroyed by a series of cover versions, but that's just me. But do you remember that remarkable lyric? Love is not a victory march, it's a cold and it's a broken hallelujah. Or if you think about the Smiths, to die by your side, well, the pleasure The privilege is mine. There is a light that never goes out. So life can be dreadful. Life can be horrific. Life can be a disappointment, and it mainly is. It can be, and is, a broken hallelujah. But through the flaws, through the challenges, through the failures, and through the vulnerabilities, great research, great teaching, greatness can be summoned. It is the grit in the oyster that creates the pearl. It's in pursuing the deep, unpopular truth, the broken hallelujah. That'll change the world. 5. Your writing improves. Now, one of the powerful and bizarre side effects of vulnerability is the impact on your writing. Now, whatever discipline you are in, writing matters, right? And the thing about writing is that you have to commit to it. Great writing, you've got to commit. You can't go, oh, look, I'll just have a go with writing. No. You've got to commit to every word, the spaces between the words, the sentence, the cascading sentences that become a paragraph. And that openness to the context around you creates better writing. So do not write as you think you should be. Instead, you write to speak to the world, not for yourself, not for your friends. You are writing of the deep self, the profound researcher, to speak to the world. So that vulnerability allows you to do something with the dancing spaces between the words and allow those paragraphs to cascade into an argument. That is meaningful research. 6. Vulnerability is a measurement of greatness. Now, I love Professor Brown's work with this metric, and it has become a metric. We live in times of metrics. Well, we've got a metric here. And she has done enough qual and quant studies to have actually developed a pretty strong metric here. And she's looked at the role of vulnerability as a proxy. So vulnerability is a measurement. It is a measurement of your capacity to manage and understand fear. And vulnerability is also a way to measure and understand your connection or disconnection from others. So vulnerability is not only a measure of your courage, but a measurement of your purpose and your engagement with work, with relationships, with life. Professor Brown also uses vulnerability in her recent theorizations of leadership, and which is an emerging area of her career. And she argues that leadership emerges when we sit in discomfort. How remarkable is that? We sit in discomfort. Leadership has nothing to do with titles or money or power. Nothing. Leadership emerges for you today, when you make a decision to sit in discomfort and challenge all the assumptions that we take for granted. 7. Be seen. Occupy space. I understand it is frightening to be seen because there's so many people in this culture that attack us for what we wear, how we look, our face, our hair, whatever. If we move, we get critique. But through all those dreadful people attacking and labelling, understand, okay, yep, you will be hurt, you will be disappointed, but you know what? Occupy space. Stretch. Sit in your power. And value your body. Value the breath. Your body, yes, yours. Your body is a gift. So share it with the world. And know that sharing your imperfections will enable and support others. 8. Here we go. understand your story. Understand your story. If this Rescue Yourself, Rescue Ourselves series has taught us anything, it is the importance of understanding your story. If you're going to understand your story, if you're going to conduct strong research, it has to exist in a narrative. So, what is your story? What is the story that you tell others? Now, this is the key. You have to connect these entities. You have to connect your story and the story that you tell others to live, to learn, to lead authentically. These stories must be integrated with authenticity, but also integrity. Vulnerability means that you do not hide your story. Instead, you seek, you find the language to share it. This story will make you cry. This story will make you howl at the moon. But at the end of your life, you will understand what it all meant. And look, I've been with people at the end of their lives. Death is not peaceful. Death is frightening. Death is terrifying. And the only peace comes from understanding the story and why that story mattered. The story is the only way to make the end meaningful, and the only way to make that end survivable for those who remain after a death. Now, we have all sorts of barriers in our culture that are going to stop you telling your story. Bullying, abuse, intimidation, nastiness, humiliation. These forces in the culture stop you from telling your story. In a shame culture, blame is assigned. But the power of that story, particularly if you have the confidence and the power to share it, is that you can answer back to shame. You can answer back to blame. And the best PhD programs create the spaces for these stories, for the diversity of our students, the diversity of the pathways into the program, and the diversity of the pathways out of the program. And there is some language, some words I can give you to help you create these triggers in and through vulnerability. So start to use the phrases like, I don't know, I need help, I'll give this a go, an important one, this is important to me, this is important to me. I disagree with you, but can we at least talk this through? Look, that didn't work, but I learned a lot. This is how I feel. Can I get your views on this? How can I improve? Can you teach me how to do this? I'm here for you. Let's move on from this. And of course, endlessly, thank you. This language will start, it will change, it will create new stories. It will also create new trajectories for our universities. 9. Hello. Show up. Show up. I am 52 years old, and I look every single day of that, let me tell you. But the thing about being 52 years old is I've lost a lot. I've lost a lot. But I tell you what, I've gained a lot too. It's been a wild ride. And look, I've met the most inspirational and extraordinary, remarkable humans through my life. And they've granted my life colour and laughter and dancing and energy and intelligence. But what I've learned through those 52 years is the importance of listening to the longing of others, listening to the loss of others, listening to the truths that other people tell you. If you are present, if you sit in your moment and you're not drawn to the past, you're not drawn to the future, if you are able to sit in a moment with a person, then that is a gift. Show up. Seriously, just show up. You want to research, you want to succeed, cool. Show up. 10. Remember that the PhD is a risk. When you enter a PhD program, you are taking a risk. So you need to enter the program knowing that. You are opening yourself to risk, you are opening yourself to vulnerability, and therefore you need to manage the vulnerability. And vulnerability is based on communication and miscommunication. Communication requires the building of trust, but it also requires the building of boundaries. So vulnerability is based on boundaries, and only those who have earned the right to hear your story deserve your trust and deserve to share your vulnerability. And of course, this is why the student and the supervisor relationship is so crucial, but it's why people get it wrong so often. Yes, it's about the student expressing vulnerability, but it actually must also be about trust and vulnerability from the supervisor. It's a communication system with boundaries. That's important. And remember, your focus is absolutely on producing a thesis, and you know that thesis will be examined. Your focus is on producing refereed articles, and you know reader 2 is a mongrel. You know that engaging with those peer reviews is going to be tough. And that's the point. We must take the feedback. We have to sit in the vulnerability of that feedback and know that our research life, our professional life, our personal lives are improved, not through blame or denial or dismissal, but vulnerability, recognition, and yes, listening. The PhD is a risk, but it is a risk that will make you powerful. And so therefore I want to finish the vlog today recorded in one of the most beautiful, desolate, dark and strange places I've ever visited in my life. Distinctive place. I wanted to remember this place, and obviously we'll remember the roosters, but I wanted to remember this place with a final moment that we're going to share. A speech from Theodore Roosevelt. And this speech is often referred to as the man in the arena speech. That's actually not right. The speech has a proper name, and I would argue it's a better name. Citizenship in the Republic. And it was delivered at the Sorbonne in Paris on April 23, 1910. Now I have this speech on a piece of paper on my home office desk. It means a great deal to me, and it has helped me enormously, particularly in the last few years. And so therefore, I wanted to remember this place, and I want to remember the vulnerability that we have shared through this speech. The speech, of course, also has an unfortunate history to it. Richard Nixon used it in his victory speech and also when he was forced to resign. Barack Obama cited this speech when he was nominating Hillary Clinton. Oops. And of course, more interestingly, LeBron James placed #ManInTheArena. He wrote that in pen on the bottom of the soles of his shoes through the 2020 season. That is interesting to me. So here, in what seems the end of the world, let's share something. Let's share some words that are more than a century old. Quote, "It's not the critic who counts, nor The man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man in the arena whose face is marred by blood and dust and sweat, who strives valiantly, who errs, and who comes short again and again. Because there's no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends their life in a worthy cause, who at their best knows the triumph of high achievement, and at their worst, if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly. End of quote. This speech always gets me going because it offers a reminder, it offers a recognition that in our lives we need to value courage over comfort. And it's a recognition that vulnerability is a strength of a different kind. It creates an openness to ideas, an openness to life, an openness to the views of others. It creates an ability and a capacity to be in a present and be present in that present. This seems a pretty strong trajectory for us as researchers, and also a pretty strong trajectory for research. From Norfolk Island, I wish you love, light, and peace. Tea out.